So today I have the honor of actually introducing Coco Brown. Now, here's the thing. I have a printout here. It's not like I don't know enough about her, but it's like when somebody has such an amazing resume, you need to be careful not to miss out on anything, right? So, a little bit about Coco. So, in the spring of 2016, Coco founded and became CEO of the Athena Alliance, an organization dedicated to advancing diversity in the boardroom with a robust membership and match delivery model anchored in her deep connection to community building, executive consulting, and professional services. Coco's genuine and strong industry relationships and ability to articulate and drive value resulted in over $1 million. Is that million? Yes, I got the zeros right. In sponsorship in its first 18 months and a network of over 800 C level women, VCs, and CEOs from over 100 companies, including companies like we all know Microsoft, Autodesk, Intuit, OpenView, Venture Partners, Accenture, Deloitte, and PwC. Coco leads Athena's vision and strategy, evolving a model that integrates into and guides the intimate networks through which boards seek directors. She also guides Athena's teams in its offerings of high touch, white glove executive coaching to the top 10% of female leaders nationwide. So, without further ado, Coco.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I appreciate the. Is this too loud? Can I do like this? Is that better? Appreciate the introduction. The ladies sitting next to me here are far more accomplished, so this will be really exciting. um, I just have to comment though on the two young ladies who were talking right before us, and how much of a parallel there is here. I'm thinking from the code room to the boardroom. You know, once you get into your senior roles in career, it becomes equally lonely, and you start to really realize that you feel like you're in a place where you don't belong because there's fewer and fewer women at the top. As we grow in ranks of leadership, so it's very similar to the experience that they had going into those college rooms and thinking, wait a minute, where are the other women? We sort of have the same experience as we get into the boardroom. So it's full circle in life. So what we wanted to talk to you about is really kind of a range of things, from story to the boardroom to what's going on in terms of transforming boardrooms today, and then also some thoughts for you as you think about board service for your future. What I wanted to do is just start off by having these fantastic women here describe themselves and their own histories. Each of them, Beatriz, on the far left here, that's Beatriz. She has a long history of board service and is what we would call a pioneer. She's been there, well before this conversation of women in the boardroom was popular, and popularized in the last couple of years. So she's paved the way for us and been on a number of boards. I'll let her speak for herself. And then Kirsten and Julie similarly don't have the traditional CEO background that you see on boards, more coming from technology backgrounds or even sales operations backgrounds, and kind of represent what's happening and transforming in the boardroom in terms of sort of opening up the aperture of the kinds of roles we see in the board. So I thought you guys could each tell a little bit about yourselves and your story to the boardroom. You want to start, Beatrice?
Sure. So my path is, as Coco said, so the more typical one of having been a CEO. So I'm a geek by training. I learned programming in high school, back when you learned programming on a mainframe with boxes of cards. So very long ago. But I went on to earn degrees in computer science and electrical engineering from Princeton and Caltech, and went into a career as an architect, software architect, and programmer. Strongly resisted moving into management for a long time until eventually I saw the wisdom of doing so. And have had a very storied career. I was the only woman technologist reporting directly to Larry Ellison at Oracle. I was responsible for 70% of Oracle's licensed revenue at the time, while we were still growing close to 100% year over year. Worked for Larry for a number of years, and then left Oracle to be CEO of a public company, Aspect Communications. Subsequent to that, I ran 3 private companies as a CEO, and took them all to successful exits. At which point I said I was done. It was time to help the next generation of CEOs. So today I sit on 3 public company boards. One is a $3 billion a year company called PriceSmart, which is a Costco-like club, but for Latin America. The founder has done 3 of these types of companies, and he is someone who is very dedicated to his communities. He has a nonprofit that's associated with his company that provides school supplies for 100,000 kids in Latin America because he really believes in making the communities in which he does business better. I'm on the board of a public communications company, Ribbon Communications, and a company called Liquidity Services, which is like eBay, but for big capital assets and retail goods, and also the board of a private company. So that's my career. I've served on well over a dozen public and private company boards, and I'm here to tell you that you can do it all. It really is possible.
I don't know if I can do it all, but the sum that I can do, I actually grew up in Alaska. So I always start with that because no one ever knows anybody from Alaska. So now you all get to say you know someone from Alaska. And I probably would have gotten a career in computer science because that was my passion. But I was the only one in my family to go to college. I didn't have any sort of college counseling. There wasn't sophistication in Alaska around this. So I went into finance because it was the only thing that was close to math and tech that I could find. And then I worked in the computer center helping people with their floppy diskettes. So I too was running cards through mainframes. But my career has really been a combination of product roles, operations roles, and the last 15 years have been really focused in technology, both on the enterprise IT side as well as in R&D. So my path here in San Francisco, I have a bunch of marquee San Francisco-based companies. I was at Charles Schwab for 8 years, half in product, half in tech. I was at Salesforce.com for 4 years as a CIO. I was at PayPal running a big chunk of R&D for 5 years, and I am now at DocuSign. So, and
Everyone knows DocuSign.
everyone knows DocuSign. Perhaps that's the biggest marquee name. I was just at a conference in the Fortune Brainstorm conference, and one of the speakers said, "You really want to be associated with a company where their name becomes a verb." And so DocuSign has become. Can you DocuSign that? Will you DocuSign that? So I am super proud to be part of a verb company.
That's great.
But the funny thing is, between PayPal and DocuSign, I had decided that I was done having an operating role. So my role at DocuSign, I lead technology and operations. So I'm Chief Technology and Operations Officer at DocuSign, kind of the CTO role and the COO role combined. And between PayPal and DocuSign, I said, listen, I am not going to have another operating role. I'd left PayPal. I'm starting Wave 1 retirement, is what I called it, which was going to be sitting on public and private company boards. And that lasted for about 9 months. So, but however, my first board seat was SGI, Silicon Graphics, which is also kind of an iconic name in the Valley, until we sold to HP Enterprise, so that was fun to be part of that transaction. And now I serve on 1 public company board, Sallie Mae, and 2 private company boards, Tricentis, which does basically tools for the DevOps space, so continuous integration, continuous deploy, automation in that space. And Diligent. Diligent is a company that serves boards, so a secure board portal in order to distribute your board materials. I'm sure Diligent is on one of your boards. And so I'm having a lot of fun. It's a challenge to have both a full-time role and be on public company boards. So maybe that's how I do it all.
Yeah,
So that's how I do it all.
That's great. Julie, how do you do it all?
Super inspiring. So I, similar to Kirsten, went to college as a finance major. I thought I was going to be a finance person. That's what I thought I wanted to do. But my first job was at Oracle, where at the time, this was many years ago, if you wanted to get anything done at Oracle, you had to do it yourself, and you had to do it by using the technology. So ended up getting to know a lot of the products and the technology there, but also, again, still thought my career was corporate finance. About 5 years into it, somebody from sales reached out to me and said, hey, you should move into technical sales because we're looking for people that know the products but can also talk to business, and you ought to try it. And I was like, where else could I try this and with not a whole lot of risk? So I moved over into sales at Oracle and ended up spending 10 years in technical sales there, doing a lot of different things and enjoyed it. So then I thought my career was kind of going to be sales. Somewhere along the line, I got convinced to leave Oracle, go to that big startup that I was going to make me rich, which did not make me rich, but I took on a much broader operational role there where I had sales operations, go-to-market strategy, pre-sales, a bunch of different functions. Learned a lot through that experience. It didn't quite go the way I had hoped, but it was a launch pad for my next role where I took on an even broader operational role, including global responsibility, et cetera. Went through several acquisitions, always at different tech companies. And then after doing a relatively short stint at Autodesk, which I was really enjoying and running sales and marketing operations there, I got the opportunity to join a cybersecurity startup and work with people I had worked with previously with some technology I was aware of was pretty unique in the market at the time. And the only trick was come be the CIO. And I was like, nah, I don't know about that. I have given enough CIOs a very hard time in my career. Why would I want to do that job? But the opportunity was too good. Decided to take that risk. And the risk was less about was it a good company and was it a good opportunity? The risk was really, and I've never done this before, and a little bit of that imposter syndrome, like, hey, I'm calling myself a CIO when I've never worked in IT specifically in my career. Anyway, it ended up being an amazing opportunity, not just to be part of a company that scaled quickly, grew, and yes, it had some ups and downs, but I also got to take on a much broader operational role there because of my sales ops background, my business ops background. I started to take on more and more functions. So it really evolved over time. Amazing experience. During that time, I met Coco. And I met Kirsten as well during that time. And at that time, all I was looking for was a CIO network. Who can I hang out with that's done this before that maybe can help me? And Coco introduced me to some amazing women and men, right, that had been successful CIOs. But in that process, she was toying with this idea of Athena Alliance and how do we create more diversity. And I'm talking to her like, yeah, board work for me would be awesome, but I really saw it much farther in the future for me. I thought, I'm just getting my arms around this job. But what was interesting in that process was it's never too soon to start thinking about whether it's something you want to do because have no idea how long it's going to take and really what it means to say, I want to do board work. So left FireEye after almost 5 years and am now at another security technology company that focuses on device visibility and control called Forescout. And similar there, I have the CIO title, but I'm also running business ops. So I've got that broader sort of cross-functional view of what's going on in the organization and a lot of program management around the complex things we're trying to do. But in this whole process, I signed up as one of the very early Athena members. First time I ever wrote a check where I invested in myself, right? I was like, I'm going to pay money to do something for me. And again, really did not know what it was going to take to get ultimately to the boardroom. But working through some of the programs and processes that they have was really eye-opening for me. But at the same time, Coco started matching me with potential companies and ended up in really less than a year, ending up at least being selected for a public company board. God knows how long it took for it actually to be official and the paperwork signed. But I'm
I think
now
about
on,
5 months.
yeah,
But
yeah.
who's counting?
And it's the company is called Axon, and they serve technology for law enforcement. So it's a really interesting, very much a technology company, but public service and the mission is protecting truth and protecting lives. So it's been an amazing experience.
That's great. I too am on a couple of boards. I'm on the Athena Alliance board, obviously, but I just joined a board in the DevOps space. We should talk. Completely focused in the UK, and I did this because all of my experience is national. I don't have a lot of business experience internationally, and this board approached me for my experience having built and scaled a company to 10x their size. And in the same exact space, slightly different, but in a very similar space, and most importantly, a very similar business model. And so the trade-off for me was, this is great. I can go get European experience while I give them, my scaling experience, and they're actually not bringing me on the board with the sole idea of me bringing them to the States and being sort of their broker for that. So, there was clearly this opportunity for shared learning, win-win on both sides, which was really important for me. So what I want us to hear a little bit about, how these all fell in everybody's laps, this great life that they have. It just sort of came to them. They didn't have to do anything to get where they are. Luck. And so I do want to hear a little bit about that, right? To kind of put aside that. But before we go there, I want us to talk a little bit about why this is such an important topic. Why it's important, even if you don't want to be on a board ultimately, why it's so important for you to understand that as a realm that you could strive for, and just why, it's, and also to be aware of sort of how much work needs to be done there. So I'm going to tee it up and then let these ladies talk about it a little bit. So we tend to think about, the stats as being, well, 20% of board seats are held by women. But if you look at where those stats come from, it's from the Fortune 500, the S&P 500, it's from the large public companies. But 80% of public companies have a market cap under 500 million. And if a company is market cap under 500 million, the average number of board seats held by women is 9%. And that's similar, that long tail of all the most of the companies out there, that long tail is the same in private companies, and it's even worse in tech companies. All you have to do is go to your favorite tech companies and look at their executive staff or their boards, right? It's really a challenge. And so it's important that we understand, what is the boardroom anyway, and why aren't we there, right? And so I think, that's how I'll tee that up and ask you ladies to give us a little bit of a sense of not only why that exists, but why is it that it's changing at a percentage of 1% per year?
So I'll start. I offered up a hypothesis on the delta in those statistics, and one of the big recruiting firms that focuses on board recruiting published a report, and 87% of all board seats are filled by individuals in the network of the existing board. And the larger companies, the Fortune 500, the ones that are pulling up the percentages and that are representing 20% and greater women on boards, those are the boards that are actually using the executive recruiters. They are saying, hey, listen, I want a diverse slate. I want to make sure that we've got representation, both from a gender perspective, but also from ethnicity and diversity in thought. They're actually even starting to use some of these more, holistic measures of diversity. And so those companies are being given those diverse slates and are making good choices, as we would say to our children. Make good choices. They are making good choices. Those smaller companies don't have as deep of pockets. It's very expensive. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to retain one of these companies to do a board search. I don't need to do that. I'm just going to talk to people in my network. I'm male. I'm white, and so I'm going to talk to my male white friends and all. So we are perpetuating that
Reality.
The reality, that problem and that reality. But rather than just steep in the sadness of it all, I have another kind of, it's going to sound tongue in cheek, but I'm actually kind of serious. Not kind of, I am serious. I think over the next 5 to 6 years, the struggle will continue to be real. But when we get into 6 to 10 to 15 years from now, all of these white men are going to be dying. They're going to be retiring and they're going to be dying. And
Natural causes.
From natural causes. We're not going to do anything. There's no conspiracy here. This is just, the number of boards that the number of boards that I've interviewed for literally in the last year, where the overwhelming majority, if not 100% of the individuals who are on the board are closer to 80 than they are to 70. Is the majority. So the majority of the boards I've interviewed for over the last, year, that's the makeup. So I say, it's going to sound like it's tongue in cheek, but I'm actually serious. So I do fundamentally believe that there is a silver lining, Coco.
And just to back
Kathleen,
her up,
I want to.
yeah, go ahead.
I want to reinforce this because I was recently on a board where this exact. No, sorry, no dying. But I was, and the one point I really want to make: your network is invaluable to you. Okay. The dirty little secret of these board recruiters is they do not actually make, even though they charge you a lot of money, they don't make their living off of finding board members. They make their living off of hiring executives. And so they only do that business with people that are giving them lots of money for other positions. So it's just the way it is, and that 87% number is accurate. So one of the boards I landed was because I'm part, believe it or not, of the West Point network. Simple fact, 97% of the people I've ever worked with are all male. And I'm an integral part of their network. So one board I sit on with a director, his West Point buddy called him up and said, I need a director. Who do you know? They didn't ask for a woman. They just asked for, I need someone who's been a CEO and who has business acumen and who is tough as nails. And so he said, oh, I know the perfect person for you. And the situation was he was a large shareholder in a company with a 79-year-old CEO who refused to have a succession plan. All the board members had been with the company 15 years, paying themselves very large checks. And so the company's IPO in 1996 generated more profit in that 1 year than the entirety of 1997 through 2017 in total. Right, so they were a little, and they were long-term shareholders, 10 years. They were a little annoyed, and they wanted change. But I found that board not through a recruiter, but because they knew somebody who they'd gone to school with, who then said, oh yeah, Beatriz is the person for you. So foster your networks, network extensively. I didn't appreciate early in my career how important networking was, because I was very happy just looking at my screen and not having to deal with people. But it is incredibly important.
How about you, Julie? You have some-
Well, I mean, I think, certainly, I think leveraging your network is super important, but you really, to the point, you have to expand that network way beyond, your sort of working network, meaning people I've worked with, people I've had experiences with. You also have to recognize that some of the people that you think are your sponsors are also quite selfish in terms of what they want you to be doing for them versus do they want you doing board work. So, one of the things I learned early on is I think I have a pretty strong network, but I realized that particular network wasn't going to get me to the boardroom because it would be taking away from what I was doing for them. So I do think it's really important that you expand way beyond your comfort zone in terms of networking. And I also think it's leveraging organizations like Athena Alliance. I mean, if you're really serious about this, invest in yourself, right? Because one of the things is I wanted to be on a board. Did I really know what that meant? Not really. I had been on the, executive team presenting to boards and that kind of thing, but I didn't know all the inner workings. And, I mean, some of the work that Athena does to help prepare you for that experience is invaluable. So I think network is really important, but, extend that network way beyond where it is today, because those are the ones and the people that are usually going to be there for you. But I mean, I got a lot of feedback when I was, sort of raising my hand and saying it was something I wanted to do, where I had people telling me, do you know how much work that is? I'm like, do you think I'm not capable of doing that work? I mean, like, so you do get signs, right? And usually those are because they're like, oh, this is going to take away from what I get from this person. So don't let those things get in your way.
Yeah, a lot of people will try to talk you out of it.
Yeah.
It's so true. And just to add on a few of those points, the average age of the public company board director in the U.S. is 63. And there are, as Kirsten was pointing out, that's the average, right? Which means there's quite a few much older than that. And then the average tenure is 8.5 years. So again, that means there's a lot of people holding on much longer than that. So a lot of validity to what what Kirsten's saying here. And then sort of likewise on the on some of Beatriz's points about where recruiting plays in. I've had a number of NomGov committees, CEOs, directors say to us, even the recruiters aren't giving us quite the slate that we're looking for. And the reason is exactly what Beatriz is saying is there's not a lot of incentive for the recruiters to expand their networks within this realm, because while they do serve some board seats and they're big dollars, like Kirsten's saying, they're, maybe 20 of the deals that they're doing in the year as opposed to 50 or 100 of the deals that that firm's doing in the year. So it's not as motivating for them. And also they're accustomed to being told in the end that while they're helping to manage a really good process and look good, from a public perspective, nonetheless, we're going to bring in this guy that we want over here, right? So we're all going to we're going to play the game, but in the end, it will be the network. It is 87% of the time. And then finally, on this point about your network and extending your network into in the right ways, is definitely you need women need to get into deal making. I'm going to call it deal making way earlier and more comfortably than we do. And that is when you're in a position to meet with a CEO or a venture capitalist or somebody who is a board influencer or board decision maker, and they're wanting to meet with you for your thought leadership, or they're wanting to meet with you for voice of the customer, which is what CIOs get all the time. Like, we would love to hear from you as the voice of the customer. If it's a meeting with a CEO or a venture capitalist or somebody who is tight in the network and you know that, then use it as your own business development meeting. You want to start getting those relationships going and having people think of you as a thought leader, as somebody who's collaborative, and doesn't mean you have to buy anything from them. But that is something we're not accustomed to doing, and we need to get more comfortable with. So how many of you know Larry Fink?
Better raise their hand.
Wait, raise your hand a little higher. Oh, yeah. How many of you know him personally? Because I would like to know of him. You do know him personally?
They're at BlackRock.
Look at where
They're at BlackRock.
Oh, you're from BlackRock. Oh, they're from BlackRock.
That would be
Okay,
why.
this is going to be good. You're gonna like to share this with him. So Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock. BlackRock has $6.3 trillion of assets under management, and Larry Fink is my man of the year. And the reason he's man of the year from my perspective is he wrote a letter to CEOs that essentially said, look, we have $6.3 trillion of assets under management. We're not the only ones. I mean, he didn't say this in the letter, but there's State Street, and there's Morgan Stanley, and there's CalPERS, and there's New York City Pension Fund, and there's all these large players that are holding on to money with long-term investment in mind, people who are saving for retirement or houses or kids' education. And they're investing large portions of that on behalf of these people. So BlackRock takes 4.7 trillion of the 6.3 trillion, something along those lines. I think that's what his letter said, and puts it into index funds. And so what happens there is, if Larry and team don't like XYZ company, they can't just yank their money out of that company as long as that company stays in the index fund. So the only way to send a message to that company is by voting their shares, by voting against things they can vote against, like board nominations, right? So what he said in this letter is, I'm going to start doing that. We're going to do that, by the way. And he's not the first one to say that. But what he said is, you need to care more about long-term value, stewarding a company with purpose and longevity and interest in society and the environment and social good and customer and community. And your shareholder is not just the person who owns your stock, but it's everybody else too. It's your customer and your society and everything that your employees, your talent, and you need to care about that. And furthermore, in order to do so, you need to build boards that are not only ethnically and gender diverse, but are career diverse. And for me, the most exciting thing of what he said out of his entire letter was career experiences. When he said, open up your board to new career experiences, that gave women so much more of an opportunity because otherwise it's left to the 6% who are Beatriz, right? And then she becomes like, wait a minute, I can't take on another one of these. There's got to be another one of me. I'm not a purple unicorn, am I? Oh, yes, I am, right?
Yes, I am.
You are a purple unicorn. So, so that's kind of turning to something that is a shining bright light. And so I want to tee that up to say, what's positive? What's changing that's good? What do you guys see that's on the horizon makes you happy, other than a bunch of white men sort of dying?
That's going to be my tagline. So I will say that the diversity in career experiences, as a woman in technology who has a background and experience in both technology, cybersecurity, and this phrase that this catchphrase, digital transformation, that all boards are looking for their companies to do, which basically just means you're old and antiquated. Would you please, give the 1990s back and get into the 2018s? And I am getting so many phone calls because of my experience and background. They want to talk to me. Of course, they say it's not because I'm a woman. I think there's always that, that helps. But it truly is because I've got technology, cybersecurity, and digital transformation in my experience base. Cybersecurity is one of the big, cyber threats, data loss, reputational loss as a result of cyber incidents is boards' greatest concerns right now. And it's a concern not just because there's a lot of companies getting breached. I think it's more because most boards don't have cyber experience. And so this is an area where they're suddenly getting to the place where they're like, looking to their right, looking to their left, and they're saying, there's nobody on this board who I feel confident can ask the right questions and can make me feel comfortable as a board member that this company is doing the right things vis-a-vis cyber. So I think that there are definitely key niches like this from a career experience perspective that practical experience is bearing out the theory around what companies need to do. And they're not doing it because of letters from,
Larry Fink.
Larry Fink. They're doing it because they truly are scared and they want to get this experience so they can feel more comfortable.
And if you are, thinking of 10 years from now or whatever length of time, be thinking about the big market trends, because something very important to landing your first board seat is to have that branding. So you're a digital transformation expert or whatever. And there are lots of those areas. So millennial workforce transformation, that is something that is going to, I think in another year or two, 50% of the US workforces are going to be millennials, right? So 10 years from now, how companies operate is going to be very different, and I can bet you they're going to be looking as much for millennial transformation directors 10 years from now as they are digital transformation directors. So think of your brand as you're preparing for your board seat, even if that's 10 years out. And the other thing that I would counsel, because this is something that in my experience women do a lot, is take more risk and be more willing to, something all three of us discussed, to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And this is something that's trained in early on. I'll give you a very simple example. My daughter was in kindergarten, and I got the dreaded call from the teacher saying, your kid is being disruptive. Could you come in? So I did. And I walked into a classroom where there was literally a circle full of girls all sitting very quietly being read to by, hello? By the teacher, and a bunch of boys are all running around with my daughter. And she said, well, your daughter's disruptive. And I said, no, my daughter's not disruptive. When you can tell me every single one of those boys is sitting down as quietly as all these girls are, and it's only my daughter that's running around, that's when you dare to tell me that my daughter's being disruptive. And so, and today my daughter is self-empowered, she fights her own battles, and she's great at it. So be thinking more about that, because as a director, you have a fiduciary responsibility to push back. And a lot of directors will say, oh, like the directors of this company I joined, well, the CEO, he's very difficult, but we don't know how to get rid of him. Yes, you do. All of you get together and you say, you're fired. It's that simple. It really is. But you have to have the conviction, and you have to be able to, if you're going to dare greatly, you have to be willing to take the risk to fail greatly. And if you fail, you failed. Learn from it and move on. Don't be afraid to take the risk, because you will not get as far in your careers as you can if you aren't willing to have that gut strength that says, I will persevere through this, because the difference between success and failure in most cases dances on the head of a pin. And that's just the fact of life of business. That's my...
True. Julie?
I mean, those were pretty, pretty
But-
comprehensive.
Maybe I'll prompt you a little bit, because I'm thinking about, career experiences and how you can think sort of broadly about what you can bring to a board as boards become broader in their thinking about the kind of experience they want to bring to it. When you were initially talking to Axon, they were interested, yes, in your security background and the tie to IT, and coming from two different security companies and which is of course extremely important to a company that's focused in security with law enforcement. But they had also made significant investments worldwide in sales, and the street was telling them they needed to optimize that investment. So maybe speak to that a little bit.
I mean, I think the reason I was initially, sort of match with them was very much, we have a very similar background, although I still aspire to be you. But what they loved was like experience scaling, right? So I had been at big companies, I'd been at small companies, I'd been pre-IPO, gone IPO. I had a lot of go-to-market background, and not just go-to-market, but global go-to-market. I had partnership in channel, and so there's a variety. And what was interesting is when I first sort of started the process around sort of branding myself as a potential board member, some of the advice I got was pick one thing. Pick one thing, be the expert at that thing, because boards don't understand when you've done a bunch of different things. They just need to know what's your one thing. And I didn't really just have one thing. And I think, joining that board was proof that, hey, it started with, we're looking generally for this, but here's a bunch of other gaps that she can help us fill. And I will also say, to the point about whether they're looking for women or not, who cares? If the only reason they called you is because you're a woman to start, who cares? Take the phone call and get on the board. Don't
Starting
let
at
that,
9%, you got to do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree with you 100%. Don't worry about being the token woman, because somebody's got to be.
Yeah.
I see a question over here, and so maybe we have some more time, and so if you want to ask a question, go for it. No, go for it, and I have another question at some point too, but your questions are important.
Hi there, I'm Courtney Jones from UBS, and I have a different perspective. I mean, we hear all the time about corporate public company boards, but there's 9,000 mutual funds and 4,000 ETFs out there, and they all have boards of directors and trustees. And I think that'd be a great opportunity for women, and there's a lot of poor governance on them. But my question is, Athena Alliance or 2020 Women on Boards, do you guys do any campaigns of activism or?
So actually, we've just developed an alliance with the 30% Coalition. So they've done a great job in knocking on doors and beating the drum. And so they finally got to this point. They called us and they said, "Hey, we finally got to this point where people are opening the doors and saying, okay, so who do you recommend?" They're like, "Oh, wait a minute, who do we recommend?" So it's been fantastic, a super great partnership, because now they come to us and they say, "Okay, we got this door open. Who do you recommend?" And so we're becoming the curated recommendation engine for them. NACD, same thing. They have a recruiting arm, but they too had struggled with stale resources and within that system, and stale sort of search capabilities. So when they were working with Bose and Forrester and whatnot, they came to us, and it was through us that they filled those board seats. So we are developing those kinds of partnerships. Absolutely.
And one of the great things about the Athena process is that you allow sort of self-curation. which is something you will never get from a corporate recruiter, because they'll just take your basic resume and present it, which, it's like, why am I paying you to present my resume? Because I can do it just fine. And sometimes they'll put it on their own letterhead. That adds a lot of value. Right? But there may be things in your background, as you were saying, that are not immediately visible, because at some level they're lower down your priority or whatever, but for that one board, it's really important.
Yep.
And that's important. So I think working through organizations like Athena will help you, not just educate you, but later help you get that first board seat.
Yeah, you had a question?
Curious to know, how early do you think about something like this? I've been part of nonprofits where we've had boards where I've actually helped get the CIO from my previous company on the board, not realizing a lot of the things I'm learning today. But curious, like, when do I start thinking about that? And also, how much time do you spend on them while you have a full plate?
Oh, good
Amazing and
questions.
incredible to hear your stories and what you do, but when did you start thinking about it?
Ladies?
Want me to?
Yeah.
So again, it was way back in the back of my head, and I will say it was after I had made it to sort of VP, SVP level. I had not had a C-level title yet, but like I had gotten to a point, but I will also say I had personally gotten to a point as well, right, where I felt like, hey, maybe I can take on something additional. But I also, like I said, I didn't know, is it going to take a year, 3 years, right? You really don't know, but the sooner you start, right, the sooner it's going to happen for you. So I don't, I think you need to have established a body of work and sort of created some things that you can really associate yourself with as being really good at, and have that body of work to be able to, bring to somebody and say, here's the value I can add. I think, personally, you got to be sure you can take it on, because the time commitment is big. I'm only on one public company board, and then I do one advisory board, but the time commitment's big, and that time commitment comes at off hours, right, when you're
Nights,
getting
weekends.
your day job done. So and that's again what I'm not just trying to plug Athena, right? Because there's plenty of organizations out there, but they walk you through these things, because it's easy to say I want to be on a board. It's something very different to understand what commitment you're making in terms of time. And I will say the board that I'm on, I think it's even a little more work than others, and not because the board that preceded me has been very hands-on engaged in this company, more than you might see with some other boards. And this company's been through a lot of transformation and a lot of change. So the expectation is, and they told me during the interview, this has not come to a few board meetings and sit on the audit committee. When we call you and we need you to get in there and not do hands-on management, but hands-on advising, we expect you to do it, and we expect everybody to share the load. So I went into that very much eyes wide open. So I think it's a matter of kind of understanding your whole sort of situation at the time, when the timing might be right. And I am not I believe you can do everything you want to do, just not at the same time.
Yeah, no,
right.
I do
So
agree.
it's,
I do agree on
it's
that,
those
yes.
types of things, right?
Yeah.
You need to understand your organization. I was a top 25 executive in a global company, and my CEO was not interested in having us serve on boards.
Excellent point.
We had to get permission to do that. So you also want to make sure your organization is receptive.
Excellent
to
point.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, go ahead.
one of the things I'll add is, so I worked with at Salesforce with a woman named Clara Shih. Clara wrote a book about using Facebook and social networks. She was in her late 20s. She was a product manager at, I was a CIO. She was kind of an entry-level product manager at Salesforce. And, I turn around 3 years later and she's on the board of Starbucks. And I'm going, are you kidding me? What just happened there? But she made, it doesn't matter how old you are, but she had taken her experience and her point of view. She turned it into something that made her an influencer by writing a book. She went out on a big, book tour about it, talk about, Beatriz makes this amazing point. Companies are wanting to know, how do I market to millennials? And Starbucks had a forward enough thinking management team and NomGov committee that they're like, wait, we need to actually get a millennial on our board so we can actually understand these things called Snapchat, I'm on a board and I asked.
I meant the things were the millennials.
Yeah,
though.
no. Well, these things are the millennials, and this thing they do, which is called Snapchat. Venmo is owned by PayPal. Many people don't know that. And I ask every board I'm on, I'm like, how many of you know what Venmo is? And I'm on a financial institution board, and I said, how many people here know what Venmo is? Not a single person.
Oh, wow.
So, it is important. So it doesn't really matter age. It literally is this piece that Julie's talking about in terms of defining yourself and being known as an influencer in an area that matters to companies.
Yes, the matters to companies is very important.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
If you're an
Don't just
expert,
being an expert in underwater basket weaving is just,
not very
there's not a lot of
useful,
people who
right?
really care about that.
Yes.
I have a question for Coco about, on the board, right? And I'm curious um, how much women are going to you versus you are seeking them out, and whether there's diversity among the women that are part of your group
Yeah.
or clients.
Yeah.
What they call clients.
Yeah, and I love the way you said that, one woman on the board.
They're hearing that part. There are
It's a
some
start.
companies
No,
that
but
are like, "Let's just
I
have one
love
woman,"
the, check
and
the
we don't
box.
want to get dinged, right? We
Right.
have the one woman, she's not really doing anything, and so
Yeah. Well, so it's a combination of things. Increasingly, and this sort of touches on something you said over here about companies being in support of their executives serving on boards. I'm seeing more and more executive or companies coming to this realization that it actually is really additive if they let their executives serve on outside boards, because they become far better stewards of their own company when they have the experience of stewarding another company at that higher echelon of, like, I've got to see over the whole. And so I see a trend towards that, and I see there's some holdouts, and I just sort of, put them aside, waiting for them to catch up. So with that, what happens is companies like Intuit and Autodesk and LinkedIn and Microsoft and Gainsight and Workfront and on, Delphix, Okta, they're all joining Athena Alliance as corporate partners. And they're signing their women up. They're saying, okay, VP level and above, we want them to go through this process because even if they don't get on a board, and it's not usual to get on a board within a year. It's 2 to 3 years for the most qualified people, right? So it can be 2 years, it can be 3 years, it can be 5 years. It can take a long time. But they're saying, even if they don't get on a board, I want them board savvy. I want them board connected. I want them understanding and standing more confident in themselves, because they will advance in their senior leadership better. So they're thinking about how to nurture their executive pipeline and how to create an executive pipeline that, when their own board looks down into their bench strength, sees strength in the women. So that it's very forward thinking, and I'm super excited about that, because it's a much more holistic view than just, we have an open board seat, where are the women?
But are you pitching these companies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, she's a very good pitch person.
Yes, she is. Yeah.
Incredibly persuasive and convincing.
But I think I'd add something that you haven't quite touched on, and that is the influence that an organization and a person like Coco has on CEOs to educate them. They don't understand the problem. They don't know that they're part of the problem. They're like, what is the problem?
Yeah.
How hard is it to find a woman, right? And so I think there's this other element to this, that her ability to help people understand what the problem is, what the benefits are, and then say, hey, by the way, I can help you, find the perfect person, is a really big part of it. Because I don't think that everyone is intentionally sitting around saying, I don't want a woman on my board. They're saying, I don't know any women to put on this board.
And that is surprisingly common. You think it wouldn't be, but I remember being at some directors conference. It was a small group setting, maybe 15 or 20 of us, and there was this guy who was not in that difficult an industry saying, we went to recruiting firms. We couldn't find a woman. We're looking for this specific skill set. I said, it's not that hard to find. You just need to but they, I mean, he was genuinely looking for someone, he just didn't have them in his network, right? So that's where the whole networking, I think, comes in.
You have a question back there?
I, it'd been so long since I had my hand up that I forgot. I'm Patty Burke. I'm with the
Looking
Center
out for you.
with the Center for Creative Leadership. We're a nonprofit, and we just recently actually brought on, well, it was 2 years ago, 2 millennial women of color from Silicon Valley onto our board. Our board prior to that had we were probably about 50% women, but they were all over 60. So the idea of bringing in that millennial diversity, I think, is really important. So just a comment on that. And then my question was, do you work with nonprofits and public companies, and how do you see that as a stepping stone to public boards?
So we work with private and public corporations, not with nonprofits. That said, nonprofit is, I see it only as a stepping stone to a corporate board in 2 ways. One is if you get onto a very high profile nonprofit, you will make the right connections that will get you onto that other board. So if you're, if you have the opportunity to join the Children's Discovery Museum of San Jose, join it. That would be one statement. The other statement is that nonprofit boards function like for-profit boards. So it's a great way to get a really strong experience in governance and the sort of ins and outs of what it takes to run a regulated company in that sense. Whereas private boards can be the Wild West if they want to. They don't really have to structure.
Yeah, I have a personal experience. My first public company board came because I was on the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society board in San Jose. If you have an opportunity to get on that board, do it. And one of the individuals who I was on the board with made the recommendation to SGI, and that was the connection there. So what she said, yeah, happens. It definitely happens. I have my current job at DocuSign because the CEO and I at DocuSign have been on the same nonprofit board for the last 10 years. So I've never joined a nonprofit in order to advance my either operating career or my board career. But if you are doing something at a board level in a nonprofit that you're super passionate about, so passionate that you're quite vocal and you share, a passion and a point of view, and you are known in that circle for your enthusiasm for a said particular cause and the things you do and what you drive in terms of outcomes within the nonprofit, it does follow that it leads to. I disagree in terms of nonprofits are run like for-profits. In my experience, nonprofits, I'm on only super, super, super well-run, extremely amazing nonprofits, and they prepared me exactly zero for what my life was going to be like on a public company
Because
board.
of the public filings and the actual financial aspect of it, or the
No, it really is that the nonprofit boards don't have the accountability. And most of it comes around certainly regulation and governance. I'm in, the board I'm on is Sallie Mae, so it's a bank. It's considered a large bank. It's well regulated. There's a ton of the regulatory aspects to it.
Yeah.
But even like the major parliamentary procedure of it all, can I get a first? Can I get a second? I'm like, am I in high school debate? This is weird. What are we doing? Thank God I was in high school debate because nothing prepared me for this. You don't actually have that kind of formality in the nonprofit boards. And it may just be me because of the regulated environments I've been on public company boards in, but there was just how we carry ourselves, how the meeting minutes are taken, how we operate in the meeting, how formal things are versus how informal it is in a nonprofit. If the nonprofit doesn't meet their goals, it's like, oh, that sucked. That's not the way it is in a public company board. It's just that's not the conversation you have.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, we have 5 minutes. Okay. You have a question.
Today's whole meeting is incredibly timely because like a week ago I received this article from a former boss that I had, and it was a publication from the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was all about women CEO statistics, comparing and contrasting females to males in the workforce on boards, like average years at the company, average years in other various roles prior to being a CEO. And then they went into traits. So that kind of ties back to hearing from the Better App team earlier. But then there was another statistic that they said, and it related to at what key event in your career did you know that you wanted to be a leader? And most often the response wasn't really had anything to do with their career. It was something prior to that, their upbringing. Curious to hear you guys' answer to that.
I'll answer it first, just because I happened to be asked a similar question earlier this week. So I'm the same way, right? Like, I think it goes way, way back. And actually, for me, it goes back to 6th grade when I ran for student body president and I lost. So not only was that an example of how do you learn from a failure, and, not every day is peachy, but it was like, I'm going to be a leader. I'm just not going to be in government. I'm going to go into, commercial or whatever. So I think some of that is just, you learn those lessons very early in your life, right? And then it's how you continue to leverage those skills over time, and always being the one taking on the thing that no one else wants to take on, or the thing that you don't even really have time to do, but I'm going to do it because, I think this could help. So it's just really always being the one willing to take it on. But I think it happened way before I started in the workforce. I mean, one more funny story, and then I'll let you guys talk. When I grew up in the Bay Area, and my very first real job was at the Burlingame Hyatt movie theater. And so I had this cool, rayon dress, and, you had the badge and all this kind of stuff. And they figured out early on, we could probably get a lot more out of her than the $5 an hour we were paying, whatever minimum wage was. And I took that job so seriously that one time my dad was finally like, okay, I appreciate you love this job. I mean, because I'd come home with these stories, and this happened, and then, and he's like, it's a freaking movie theater. Set your goals a little higher than that. But I do think that that's just part of it. Like, even in that job, I'm moving to the ticket counter, man. That's what I want to do, is sell the tickets and count the money. I don't want to be back here selling popcorn, right? And he was just like, okay. So from early on, it was kind of like, how do I take that next step? So.
There's a really good podcast on Radio Lab, I think it is, that talks about, it follows stories of CEOs. And essentially, there was a study that was done that, I forget, it was somebody at Stanford was doing this study, and the traits of a great CEO. And they sort of discovered it's somewhat like saying, you're tall, therefore you will be a great basketball player. They couldn't come up with anything that nailed it. Right? Like, you can have very introverted CEOs, you can have very extroverted CEOs, you can have client-facing, internal-facing. And so they sort of illustrated this. It was a great podcast. And they interviewed the woman who runs Frito-Lay and all of that. What is that company? Yes, her. They interviewed Satya Nadella. It was just fantastic. But I would just echo drive. I mean, for me, there was never a question that I wasn't going to be in charge. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah. When I get asked that question, the thing I always say is my core body emotion is courage. I am so fearless and so courageous, and I have been since I was a kid. I mean, my driving force was getting out of Alaska. It's like, I will do anything and everything to get out of this place. And so that was, so from a very early point, I set a very specific goal that was a very high hurdle. I mean, we had no money. No one had gone to college, but I was like, this is how I get out of here. And so my entire life was focused on that. But my core body emotion is courage, and, shoulders back, here we go.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, the last thing I would say is very much the same way. I was brought up that you go do stuff, and don't let anything stop you, because that's just it's not allowed to have anything stop you. But that being said, I did resist going into management, because the only thing when I was a young engineer that I saw is that managers went into rooms, had meetings, and left, and that seemed very boring to me. So I honestly had no idea what a heck a manager did, but I knew I didn't want to be one. Until I was working on this very exciting next generation project. Our team had gotten to be about 7 or 8 people big, and my lab director came to me and said, look, this is big enough now that it needs a manager. and we can either hire one for you, and you will hate that, or you can be that manager. It's your choice. And I finally said, oh, fine, okay, I'll do it. Even though they've been pushing me and so on for years to become a manager, I just didn't want to do it, and I refused. But after that, it was like, okay, I just have to change my mindset. I'm no longer about being excellent at what I do and how much code I generate. I now have to be the conduit to empowering all this team to be 8, equals 9, and it just changed your mindset.
Can I just one last point, because I just had this conversation with a corporate vice president at Microsoft, which is like the CEO of most any company because they're so huge. And she said she kept getting asked to be promoted into this position, and she kept saying no over and over and over again. And she was essentially doing what we do. She opted out. And the reason she opted out was because she had a son who had special needs, and she was in this particular school, and he really, so she was focused on this. And finally, at the last time they asked her for the promotion, they said, look, this is the last time we're asking you, but we really want you to take this job. And she said, you never asked me why. I said no. And they said, well, why do you say no? What would it take? And she said, well, here's my situation. If you can solve my problem, I will take your job. And they solved her problem. And I guess I would just say, in addition to courage and, just tenacity and guts and all of that, don't opt out because you assume somebody's not going to give you what you want. Because, if you don't ask, you don't get. Thank you.